Hey guys, it is the Comics Kid 2099 and I am here to do a graphic novel review. I will be talking a little bit about the 1991-1992 Star Wars miniseries titled Dark Empire from Dark Horse Comics. This mini was written by Tom Veitch and drawn by Cam Kennedy. I've said in the past that, for me, Star Wars basically begins and ends with the original 3 movies. I am not absolutely set against sequels and prequels and in-betweenquels that further explore this universe, but I find that nothing I have seen with the name Star Wars on it that isn't one of the original 3 movies is any good. At least, that's my experience. Now, before anyone comes screaming that I have defamed the good name of whatever expanded universe you hold dear, keep in mind that I probably haven't read whatever you love, so I'm not dismissing it. But what I have experienced, most of the Star Wars Tales books, the 3 Star Wars Infinities books, the first Clone Wars series by Genndy Tartakovsky, the 2008 animated Clone Wars movie, I just didn't really like any of them. And I've already done an extensive video on my thoughts and feelings on the prequel movies. So where do I fall on Dark Empire? It's held in somewhat high esteem by Star Wars fans from what I understand. After all, it was the first Star Wars comic to be done at Dark Horse Comics. Before this mini, the license to do Star Wars books was held by Marvel Comics, but they let the license pass without renewing it, and Dark Horse Comics picked it up and began their empire, pun intended, with this story. This mini is also from a time when the Star Wars Expanded Universe was really more of an expanded suburban development, not really a fully furnished wing of the Star Wars universe just yet. This trade paperback that I read has a foreword from Kevin J. Anderson about how, at the time this was being planned, there was some books by Timothy Zahn, this miniseries, and then 3 novels from Anderson himself. And that was about it. So what do I feel about this book? Well, I have to say I came away from this feeling largely unimpressed. I understand that in the present day, when there's video games, novels, animated series, comic books, and upcoming movies, it would be kind of hard to make any kind of real impression in the Star Wars world. Any characters you use you didn't create, you have to more or less leave them undamaged by the time you are done playing with them because there's half a dozen other people who will be using that character when you're done. This is largely why I don't really care to get involved with the Star Wars Expanded Universe, because it feels basically like a money grab. They aren't interested in telling organic stories that flow from one to another effortlessly. They're mainly interested in making money with products that carry the Star Wars branding. But in 1991, this wasn't really what was going on. I guess the people involved with what existed of the expanded universe at the time could maybe see what was to come, but I would think that with so few non-film versions of Star Wars out there, that these guys could have done something engaging that felt exciting and new. You know, like the real Star Wars. Instead, we got Dark Empire. But that's enough preamble. It's possible that some of you guys watching this video have not read this book, so allow me to quickly summarize the plot. It's 5 years after the events of Return of the Jedi, but the Empire has not been defeated. Instead, it has scattered into factions that war with each other and war with the Rebel Alliance. Leia and Han Solo are going to rescue Luke Skywalker and Lando Calrissian from some planet, but Luke wants to get kidnapped by a giant beam of light. We find out that the Emperor is not as dead as we thought he was at the end of Return of the Jedi. He is basically just a big ball of energy, and he is so powerful that he is burning out his body. So every time this happens, he has a bunch of clones of his body ready for him to take control of. The Emperor offers Luke a chance to rule the galaxy by his side, and Luke says, okay, and then basically the rest of the book is Leia and Han rescuing Luke from his own stupidity. This is all done in 6 issues, which itself is a problem for me, because I feel like a story this light on substance could have been done in 3 issues without losing any of what I just said. Now, before I get into the thick of things and discuss the story side of this book, I don't want to forget to talk about the art, as I often do. Cam Kennedy's art reminds me of some pure, uninked Frank Miller, or when Miller is inking himself. The human beings almost don't look human at times, and I am not saying that as an insult. I'm sure you can think of a few moments from Frank Miller's Daredevil run, or some of his other works, where a human is portrayed in such a way where only the very basic features shine through, yet this does not detract from the art. The same is true for Kennedy's art in Dark Empire. If anything, the simplicity of it is what makes the art iconic, in my humble. I do have some trouble with this art though, and if I had to summarize my issues with the art in just one word, I would say busy. Far too many pages of this book feature full-on war zones going on with AT walkers, Imperial cruisers, or extended chase scenes in a dirty city the likes of which we haven't seen since Blade Runner. These pages are, in my humble, acting as if they are playing out on the big screen when they just aren't. Comic books are not films, and this story really feels like it is trying to pretend like it is a film. And in a film, it's fine to open up the movie with a couple of spaceships entering into the frame, with one of them firing on the other one. It's even okay to have a few scenes like this, though if you have too many, it begins to overpower the narrative, I think. And that's really what I see going on here. This book feels the need to show us giant planet crushers destroying Imperial cruisers more than it feels the need to properly introduce us to Lando Calrissian, or Han, or Leia. I don't think we ever get a clear look at Lando, and while we do get a few good shots of Han and Leia, they are always in the frame with crowded background stuff like rookie rebels or tall skyscrapers. Sometimes less is more. If you take a page to show us Han and Leia escaping, maybe you don't have to cram pencil work into every space of the panel, as I feel like it draws attention away from what we need to be paying attention to. This is not Where's Waldo. Each panel really should be pointing us toward what we need to be looking at instead of making us work harder for it. Unless the object is to show us a massive fleet of planet destroyers, in which case that's fine, but that's not what this book is doing. Getting back to the plot of this book, I want to first get into my first real problem on the story side of things, both with this book and with the Star Wars Expanded Universe as a whole. If I am going to want to read a Star Wars comic book, I want it to be absolutely full of brand new characters, new worlds, and new civilizations. I don't want to see the same characters again and again. This was part of my big issue with the prequel films, except there, it's at least expected that you will be seeing Obi-Wan Kenobi, Anakin Skywalker, and possibly Yoda. But this book is even worse, at least about regurgitating characters from the movies. We get Han, Leia, Chewbacca, Wedge, Lando, Luke, 3PO, R2, Admiral Akbar, Mon Mothma, Boba Fett, and Emperor Palpatine. Now, I am sure that everyone else in the universe does not agree with me. They want to see Luke going off to train a new generation of Jedi, or Han leaving behind his life as a scoundrel and becoming a respectable commanding officer in the new universal government. And I would maybe be okay with this book if we got to see those things. After all, that would at least be new things for these characters to be doing. But no, we're basically seeing Luke do the exact same thing that he did in Return of the Jedi. He lets himself get captured there so that he can get close to Darth Vader and try to convince him to turn on the Emperor. Here, he lets himself get captured so that he can get close to the Emperor and sabotage his attempts to destroy the rebellion. Han and Leia are basically going from point A to point B to point C, much like how they were in Empire Strikes Back, except that they are rescuing Luke here instead of the other way around. I don't feel like this story is actually doing anything new or interesting with these characters. It might have been an innovative idea to see Luke experiment with the dark side so that he can understand it and try to use it to help his friends, but any of that, if it is happening, is off-screen. In a way, Luke reminds me of the Star Wars in 5 seconds videos that are kind of popular on YouTube. I'm happy, I'm sad. Only here it's, I need to be captured, I'm evil, no I'm not, I need to go back, I'm evil again, no I'm not. What happened to Luke being really powerful and smart in the Force? Did that just disappear in some story in between Return and this story? And then we've got characters like Palpatine and Boba Fett. I'm sure there are people who got excited when these guys were here, even though they were supposed to be dead, but I am not one of those people. For one, Boba Fett is not as interesting as people seem to think. If you go back and watch the original trilogy, which, if you will recall, that is basically where Star Wars begins and ends for me, he has roughly one line of dialogue, and he gets taken out by a blind guy with a stick. Any love that people have for this guy comes from the expanded universe. And so, I guess people who love this character might feel obligated to love this story because this is the one that brings him back to life after he was killed in Return of the Jedi. But let me ask those of you who have read this story a question. Did Dark Empire really need Boba Fett? He's only in an issue of this 6-issue story, and even then, all he really does is chase Leia and Han around for a little bit, thus prolonging the story a little bit. His role he plays here is entirely unnecessary, and even if it was essential, he could have been played by any bounty hunter. Then we have the Emperor. I feel like the role of evil bad guy trying to reunify the bits of the Empire could have been taken by just about anyone. If you need the bad guy to be an evil Force user, then yeah, I guess that does narrow things down a little bit. But I didn't really see any moment here where I thought that the big bad had to be an evil Force user. This story would have more or less remained unchanged if we found out that Moff Tarkin had survived the explosion of the first Death Star and was pulling the strings here instead of Emperor Palpatine. And speaking of the Emperor, this book, being from the year 1991, predates the first of the Star Wars prequels by 8 years. In fact, it's entirely possible that Veidt and Kennedy did not even think there would be any prequels, as at this time in history, Lucas was pretty content retiring from Star Wars, as it had taken up so much of his life at that point. But when you read this book in a post-Phantom Menace world, it's a little hard to swallow when you know some of the backstory from the prequels. Now, maybe that's a problem with the prequels and not with this book. After all, this book certainly can't be expected to know what kind of story Lucas would lay down in 8 years in The Phantom Menace. And hey, even with all of the numerous problems that the prequel movies had, maybe we shouldn't even blame them for contradicting certain elements from a book like Dark Empire. After all, it would be utter madness to try and fit a story into a tapestry that is as large as Star Wars without contradicting something that came before. But regardless of who should get blamed, or if anyone should get blamed at all, Dark Empire does not exactly fit with the story that we got in the prequels. We have a few things like Emperor Palpatine saying that he has died many times, and that he has a body of clones at his disposal to just slip into after each death. Which, I guess it's possible that this happened in between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope, but I certainly just got the feeling, watching the movies, that Palpatine was just an ordinary guy who got old and shriveled thanks to Mace Windu's bossness. And then the Emperor says that he took a holocube from a Jedi who we are told lived 600 years previously. I guess it's possible that he took it from a Jedi who knew an older Jedi who knew an older Jedi, but I get the feeling that he is saying that 600 years ago he took it from a Jedi. These are two of the big things, but there are a few other similar situations which, if you've seen the prequels, then it has the potential to be a little bit jarring. Although that could just be my mostly movie mind looking at this piece of the EU. If you're a master of the expanded universe, you might be used to this kind of inconsistency. And herein lies my problem with the expanded universe. Star Wars, at least the first 3 movies, they really did feel like one giant 6-hour story spread out over 3 films. Unlike something like the Back to the Future movies or the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, the movies all stood pretty well on their own. But make no mistake, they were one giant story. This is evident in the fact that from square one, we've got most of the villains either on screen or being mentioned in a way that makes them sound important. And then by the end of the trilogy, all of the villains are dead. So if you are going to have an expanded universe, it certainly feels like you only have 2 options. 1, bring the bad guys back from the original trilogy, or 2, create surrogates to stand in for the original bad guys. So Thrawn, he'd basically be Moff Tarkin if he was feeling a little bit blue. This is really where the root of all of my problems with the expanded universe lies. I feel like anything that tries too hard to be dissimilar to what we saw in the original trilogy is not going to feel like true Star Wars. That doesn't necessarily mean it's bad, but it just won't feel like Star Wars to me. But in the other direction, you've got all kinds of creators trying to emulate what we saw in the original films, and it makes it seem like it's all been done before. I knew you before the West was won. There's just no way to win. Actually, no, there is. For my money, the best place to take Star Wars outside of the original movies is the exact same thing that I said when I talked about casting Harrison Ford, Mark Hamill, and Carrie Fisher in Star Wars Episode 7. Don't use the characters from the movies. Create entirely new characters. You can even jump ahead 400 years and set up an entirely new conflict that scarcely even touches on what we saw in the original trilogy. This way, you can create a conflict that feels new because it is new. You don't have to worry about keeping the characters air quotes safe because you're not using characters that everyone else will be using. And while the danger of new characters 400 years after Return of the Jedi acting like Han Solo or Luke Skywalker is certainly there, that is always going to be a problem in just about any Star Wars project. But it's not an insurmountable problem. With the right writer, characters can feel new and original and not like one-dimensional clones of existing characters. And I don't mean actual clones from Mandalore. that does seem to about wrap up my thoughts on this book. I did seem pretty down on this story, and I didn't want to be. I wouldn't have bought this book if I thought it was going to be bad. I certainly wouldn't have bought the sequel if I thought I was going to not enjoy the predecessor. But hey, maybe the sequel will be better. I guess I can dream, can't I? Anyway, I hope I didn't depress you guys with all my negative energy, or anger you guys if you love this story. If I didn't depress or anger you, maybe you'll consider clicking that like button, as well as sharing, commenting, and subscribing for more videos from this moi. I will be back tomorrow with some other kind of video, and until then, I will see you guys later. Have a great day.